You are listening to the IoT For All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All podcast on the IoT For All Media Network. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon, one of the co-creators of IoT For All. Now, before we jump into this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or join our newsletter at iotforall.com/newsletter to catch all the newest episodes as soon as they come out. Before we get started, if any of you out there are looking to enter the fast-growing and profitable IoT market but don't know where to start, check out our sponsor, Leverage's IoT Solutions Development Platform, which provides everything you need to create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. So, without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All podcast. Welcome, Warren, to the IoT For All show. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. It's been scheduled for a couple of weeks now, so this is exciting to have you. I'd love to start out by having you give a quick introduction about yourself, talk about your role, kind of your experience, background, anything you think is relevant for our audience to just get a better sense of who they're listening to.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Warren Chaisatien here. I am a Senior Director of Global IoT Marketing with Ericsson. In my role, I work with our telecom operator and ecosystem partners globally on joint strategies and go-to-market activities as they serve enterprise clients with our IoT offerings. And it has been an exciting time, Brian. The IoT market has been growing very rapidly in recent years.
Absolutely.
As you know.
Yep. Mm-hmm. How'd you end up at Ericsson? Like, what's the background experience that kind of led you there?
I was an industry analyst myself for roughly a decade, and that gave me a very good background in strategy and vendor positioning and telecom operator and enterprise requirements. And then about 10 years ago, I joined Ericsson in Australia as head of marketing for this part of the world. And then about 5 years ago, I moved up to Stockholm to take up Ericsson's very first global role in IT marketing. And again, it was a very exciting time. And since then, I have remained with Ericsson headquarters, even though physically I am now back in Australia.
Well, that's fantastic. Congrats on that. That sounds like an awesome career and exciting time to be able to move around and explore a lot of different areas of the company. And then, be in this Senior Director of Global Marketing role for IoT. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So let's go into a little bit about Ericsson. I'm sure most people listening are familiar with the company itself. Obviously, Ericsson's a big name, but as it relates to IoT, I'd love if you could just quickly expand on the overall approach and role that Ericsson has in the space, and just talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Ericsson's role in IoT is far and wide. First and foremost, we provide connectivity for IoT devices by building cellular IoT networks around the world. Ryan, these networks are offered by our telecom operator partners, and they are known as narrowband IoT, Cat M1 networks, or even 4G LTE, and now 5G networks, which our audience would be familiar with, right? We have built more than half of the world's commercial cellular IoT networks that are commercially available today. So that's our first and foremost contribution. Now, the second part is that we also provide global connectivity management for IoT devices using our IT platform, which is called the Ericsson IoT Accelerator. This platform, again, offered through our telecom operator partners, allows enterprises, especially those operating globally, to connect anything, anywhere with ease. Last year in 2020, our platform business outgrew the market by 3 times. It is now serving over 6,500 enterprises and manages over 70 million IoT devices through a global network of 35 plus telecom operator partners that we have around the world.
That's awesome. That's great. And as you all focus in different areas and different industries, verticals, and so forth, is there a particular focus as it comes to use cases or industries? Or it sounds like you're obviously very far and broad reaching, kind of across the board. But is there any kind of specialty or area that you all focus more on than others, or is that not, or is it more of a broader approach?
Yes, we do. Even though, when it comes to IoT, in our IT business, it's pretty horizontal, meaning our platform and our IT networks can connect any connected devices, really, right? But from a use case and industry perspective, as a company, we are very strong in the automotive industry, also very strong in industrial manufacturing and in energy and utilities. And now, with the rise of private networks, we are also focusing heavily on ports, meaning seaports, airports, oil and gas, mining, and also public safety. And as I said before, IoT is pretty horizontal, right? So our platform, the IoT Accelerator, currently also manages a large number of consumer devices like wearables, tablets for senior citizens, even laptop computers and security alarm systems.
Great. Now, is there any, let's say, any exciting or new use cases that have recently been developed with Ericsson involved that you could share kind of just briefly?
Absolutely. So over the years, we have connected, multiple kinds and multiple types of industrial equipment, and I can briefly talk about quite a few use cases. For example, we've been working with Globe Tracker, which is a global logistics company, and they manage fleets of sea liners around the world, right? So and they use our IoT technology to in their food transportation business, and that is very interesting because in the process they are able to reduce global food wastage from farm to fork.
Okay.
Now, and with control and visibility of the goods and containers that they track, now they can reduce food wastage by up to 30%, and that's fantastic from an environmental perspective, right? Or another example that I can give you is a company called Grundfos. They are the world's largest pump manufacturer, water pump, and they use IoT to optimize energy consumption. And importantly, they are now able to change their business model from selling pumps as hardware to start selling pump maintenance as a service, with an eventual goal of offering business-based business outcome-based. For example, in the future, it would be water as a service. You don't even have to worry about pumps or pump as a service or pump capacity, because pump users, what they want at the end of the day is water. And so Grundfos is moving in that direction. These are some examples, examples that that's really exciting, and how our technology is really transforming those business models and enhancing customer experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree. I appreciate you kind of sharing those use cases. It's always good for our audience to just have kind of that connection between what you all do and then the real life kind of deployments that are out there. So that I appreciate those insights there. I want to transition here for a second into kind of the new hot topic that is connected to Ericsson as of the listening of this episode, which is the Connected Enterprise report that you all did. I think it's it's an absolutely fantastic report for anybody out there who has not had a chance to view it yet. Could you talk a little bit about just overall the kind of the purpose of the report, the goal, how it was conducted, and just the general high level understanding about kind of what this report is about?
Yeah. So, Ryan, to keep pace with the IoT market, we started a Talking IoT with Ericsson podcast series on our website almost 2 years ago now. And in that series, we have interviewed the movers and shakers of this industry. And so far, we have produced 20 episodes. And our guests have included the CEOs, the CTOs, Chief Technology Officers, and Chief Digital Officers. For example, these are some of the job titles that we have interviewed, right? So leaders from businesses from various sectors, and of course, the senior executives of our own telecom operator partners. So the report that we are talking about, the Connected Enterprises report, It is really an outcome of those interviews. It features real and practical insights from those business leaders who have applied technology to do digital transformation in their business. So in short, it's really a compilation of words of wisdoms from those leaders who have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's fantastic. Yeah,
we put together this report with this goal to share those learnings with our partners and customers, right? And we mentioned some of the use cases previously, and in that report, there's much more. And our listeners and our partners and customers can learn how IoT is being used, and especially the insights from those leaders. So in other words, the learnings are so good we could keep them to ourselves.
Absolutely. Now, I know one of the main topics of the report is what you all call the 6 golden rules around, or for digital transformation success. And I wondered if you could just kind of quickly run through those at a high level. There's a ton of questions I have about this report that are, I want our audience to hear. But if we could just start out with that, I think it would set a good tone for the rest of the conversation.
Absolutely. So from those learnings, we have classified them into 6 golden rules, as you mentioned. So let me walk you through these golden rules one by one. The first rule is we have to put the customer first, right? The end user must always be the focus, not the technology. Now, as companies, as organizations, we really first have to understand the challenges that our customers are trying to solve. Only then can we determine how we can use technology to support it. Rule number 2, capture the data opportunity. And as we know, every day more and more devices are connected, creating an ocean of data, right? But the real question is, what can we do with it? Now, a lot of companies are struggling with this. Let me give you a very meaningful quote from one of our interviewees from the interviews, right? Victoria Van Camp, who is the CTO of SKF, which is the world's largest bearing manufacturing company. In the interview, she said, "It's not data that's the new gold. It's the insights." Right? That's the new gold.
Sure.
And I think that's really meaningful, because there's a lot of data and it's, a lot of noise, a lot of confusion out there. But you really need to know what specific problems you are trying to solve for your customers or end users. And then we can, squeeze out the insights or the intelligence out of that ocean of data. Now,
absolutely.
Golden rule number 3. We can all start small and then scale. And, the successful organizations that we have spoken to, they all started small with a pilot program or proof of concept. Don't be afraid to try it out, run tests and experiment. Make sure that your intended outcomes are being met before you scale. And in the early stages of IT projects, even large enterprises can take inspiration from small startups, and that is to act early, to fail fast, to test often, and to start again, right? Don't be afraid to do that. Number 4, embrace new ways of working. And this is quite interesting, because change is happening so quickly now with technology and ways of doing things. So digital transformation leaders must understand that new ways of doing things will be the only way forward. There's no 2 ways about it, right? And that being static means being left behind. And so, organizations, we have to morph and change and become nimble to be successful with technology. Number 5, don't do it alone. Again, this is a real key learning that we have. I kept hearing all the time. To successfully innovate, organizations need to spend time building a strong network of partners and alliances, and become part of a digital ecosystem. This is really a team sport, because there's no single company, vendor like ourselves or our telecom service provider partners, or eventually our enterprise end users. No one can do it alone, right? Gerhard Lutz of Telstra, Australia's largest telecom operator, he goes even further than that. He believes in. He also believes that the ecosystem that we talk about needs to be open, right? So that new partners can join. And he said his company Telstra is really open with standards, and Telstra is really encouraging competition because it's good for the business, good for the industry, and it serves the customer's need the best that way.
Okay.
Last but not least, golden rule number 6: don't compromise on security. And again, security has been a hot topic, or you can say a concern for enterprises deploying IoT for years now, and it's not going away, right? So security, IT security cannot be an afterthought. It has to be built in, not bolt on. And if security knowledge is not your core strength, no problem. That's totally okay. Use trusted security providers. There are providers out there who can help you. Don't try to reinvent the wheel or become an expert yourself. Focus on your business, focus on your customer, and there are other people who can help you. Safeguarding data is really important and must be put in place even when you are doing trials, not just commercial launches. So, Ryan, those are the 6 golden rules that we have learned from our leaders.
Fantastic. And when you've talked to these leaders, I'm sure you've had a good conversation around the challenges that companies that they've worked with face, in their digital transformation journey, their IoT journey, as they look to transform their business. What were some of those challenges that were that kind of rose to the top in those conversations, and what advice was there to kind of how to overcome them?
Absolutely. And I think the change is always a challenge for everyone. And I think the biggest change is that organizations are traveling into the unknown as they embark on digital transformation. The 6 golden rules that we have just discussed can help them navigate through that journey. But in addition to that, we know that businesses embark on digital transformation for a few key reasons, right? Either they want to optimize operations, that is to realize cost efficiencies and operational efficiencies, or at the end of the day, to grow revenue. For example, by serving customers better, or by selling new things, new products and services, or break into new markets, right? To help enterprises with that, from our part, we need to ensure that Ericsson's products and services can deliver clear business values to them very quickly. And to that end, we have developed business calculators to help them quantify the benefits of using our technology so that they can embrace change with confidence. And we have done quite a lot of studies to help them with that. For example, in manufacturing, which we touched on briefly before, we can clearly demonstrate that using augmented reality, the payback period is less than 3 years. And again, that's fantastic return. Or in mining, using drones to inspect areas that are deemed too unsafe for human workers can reduce downtime costs by 50%. Again, these are really solid, quantifiable benefits to help enterprises overcome some of the major challenges that they have.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you kind of sharing those insights. It's always a interesting question to just kind of get thoughts on what companies across different industries, play different roles in the industry, are seeing with organizations as they kind of embark on this journey. So to see that there are some common trends and some obviously proven ways to get through them is very encouraging for organizations out there listening who are kind of deciding on how to get started on their digital transformation journey. So that's very helpful. I do want to kind of shift a little bit and talk a little bit more about the connectivity side of things, which is obviously a very big element of this report. And there is a quote in the report. I don't want to read it necessarily because I want people who are listening to go read the report because it's a really good quote. But it talks about how IoT and cellular connectivity are making things possible that were not possible in the past. And I don't think a lot of people out there really understand kind of just what IoT and cellular connectivity, not only individually, but combined, are enabling. And I'd love it if you could shed a little bit of light on kind of what that quote and comment kind of alludes to from your understand or your experience in the space, as well as your conversations with these movers and shakers that you talked to for the report.
Yeah, that's right. So, Ryan, we have talked about safer work environments in mind, for instance, right? Now, in order to elaborate on this, I think the best way is to give you examples or give our audience examples of how IoT and cellular technology are creating new customer experiences and driving new revenues.
Sure.
One interesting commercial deployment that we are starting is connected coffee machines. These are commercial coffee machines that you can find in office buildings, conference centers, and gas stations with a large screen that allows us to choose our own beverages, right? So managed by our IoT accelerator platform, these machines enable coffee machine operators or venue owners to adjust prices according to demand and time of day. Ryan, this is like happy hours in the pub, right? and hence maximizing revenue for either the operator or the venue owners. And so that's one good example of how it is helping with new business models and revenue generation in a very simple way. But go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish that thought.
Yeah. So in this study, right, we look at how since these coffee machines are connected, we now understand consumer coffee drinking behavior. So the operators or the venue owners can also dynamically test new products. For example, when there's a new coffee flavors coming out, you can do a consumer kind of a reception test whether or not it would fly, right? And the large screen itself that we see can also be turned into an ad display, which means, again, a new revenue stream for either the coffee machine operator or the venue owner. And imagine yourselves in a gas station, right? Filling in your tank, going to get a coffee, and then you see an upsell, a promotion. For example, specials on hot dogs or snacks. And we are tempted, we end up buying a combo, coffee and a hot dog. Clearly an upsell win for the gas station in this case. We are in this particular use case, we also explore the benefit of consumers being able to order drinks using their mobile phones, hence improving customer experience and a very welcome feature in light of COVID, right? So, there are also, you can see that by connecting a coffee machine, you can now explore multiple angles, either delighting your customers or delivering new revenue streams through advertising, upselling, and basically generating more income for the operator.
I'd love if you could expand a little bit just on that piece, because you mentioned it now like two, 3 times in the last couple seconds about the business models and the revenue streams that cellular connectivity and IoT are kind of enabling. If you could just maybe broaden that a bit and just talk a bit about what you've seen and what you've kind of learned through obviously doing this report and just your general experience in the industry about how cellular connectivity and IoT are enabling new business models and revenue streams, not just for consumer kind of oriented businesses like a gas station and with coffee and hot dog kind of upsells and those kinds of things, but like across the spectrum. Is there any kind of trends you've seen as far as the enabling of these new businesses or business models and revenue streams because of IoT and the cellular connectivity piece?
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing a broad trend, and this is applicable to all industries, right? So the overall trend is that businesses are moving or shifting their business models from selling hardware, or as I mentioned before, selling water pumps, right? So they are moving from selling things to selling services or outcome-based revenue business models. And previously, I mentioned Grundfos, who's been selling pumps, and they've been doing that for over 100 years, right? So their traditional business is selling pumps as hardware to businesses and venue owners. And now with their pumps being connected, they know the performance of their pumps. And now they can sell pump maintenance as a service, as a revenue on top, right? And then going forward, they will start selling pump capacity. So as users, we don't really care. In fact, no one wants to own and operate pumps. They just want what the pump can do for them, right? So Grundfos is moving towards selling pump capacity as a service, and eventually, as I mentioned before, selling water as a service. And Ryan, coming back to our consumer market, I think this trend of outcome-based revenue generation of business model has been around for quite some years now. If you look at the shared economy or sharing economy, the concept is the same, right? We on our smartphone we call them Uber or Lyft because we don't want to own cars. We just want to get from A to B. That's a basic concept, but that concept now is becoming more pervasive in the industrial or in the business environment because of IoT and connected products and global connectivity that we have been talking about.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I wanted to stay on the topic of the kind of IoT and connectivity, mainly kind of focus on the connectivity piece and talk about, and the reason I bring this up is because we get a lot of questions and a lot of good engagement when we have when that connectivity conversation comes up. And I think a lot of that is because connectivity piece is often a piece of the solution that is often confusing for a lot of people because there are so many different types of connectivity. Now, I wanted to have you just elaborate on kind of why the choice of connectivity is so important for long-term success in an IoT solution. And I know that the report talks about 3 key kind of fundamentals about this decision-making process. And I'd love it if you kind of explain those a little bit and maybe just kind of talk in your own words about why that's so important and how to approach it.
Yeah, connectivity is really the foundation of digital transformation. And I guess you're right. There's a lot of options out there. And one key thing that we have learned is that when it comes to digital transformation, enterprises often think about connectivity last. But we really encourage them to think about connectivity first because it's really the foundation. And because without connectivity, nothing would happen, right? We spoke to companies in various industries whose products are manufactured in one place, but and end up being used in another place. You look at car companies and even consumer devices that we've been talking about. And I mentioned Global Tracker before, logistics companies, right, whose business is really tracking things on the move. And so when it comes to the choice of connectivity, businesses must ensure that they have a connectivity technology that works seamlessly everywhere, be it indoor, outdoor, across town, across the continent, or even around the globe in many cases. Because it would defeat the purpose of having your assets connected if they cannot send and receive data due to a lack of connectivity or due to unreliable connectivity. And besides that, companies need to consider a connectivity technology that is inherently secure, right? We talk about the importance of security. They need a technology that can really scale as their IoT business grows. And if you look at all of these considerations, cellular technology really tick all these boxes to have end-to-end visibility anywhere. Right. So you don't have to worry about, indoor and outdoor coverage. You don't have to worry about fiddling with, multiple passwords for multiple networks. It would just not work that way. And you mentioned 3 key fundamentals in the report. Yes, we have outlined those. And these 3 key fundamentals go beyond the choice of technology and the choice of technology, of connectivity. So we talk about, three fundamentals in the sense of number one, IoT is about business, and success flows top down from the top, meaning that companies will need management that is willing to commit to digital transformation, to IoT projects, and maybe willing to take some risks, try out new business models, and even challenge or throw out legacy ways of doing things. Number two, let values guide your vision, because most of the digital experts that we spoke to not only focus on business values. Of course, the business values are really important, and that's what they want to achieve in the first place. But most of them had a clear organizational purpose that motivated them to make a positive change on society. I talk about food wastage, for example, is a good example. Or we talk about employee safety, right? By sending in drones and robots. These are, you can say, perhaps soft benefits, but they are super important from a societal and environmental perspective. Fundamental three that we talk about is that we ought to begin with holistic thinking, right? End to end in mind. Businesses can set up digital transformation for long-term success, and they have to think about all aspects: operations, implementation, skill sets. And for example, if you are an asset-heavy business, ripping and replacing isn't necessary at all. Instead, think of the things that you can do now, you can upgrade and enhance over time.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of think about connectivity not as much as a challenge as it is a kind of benefit with the number of connectivity options that are out there to find the perfect one that fits a particular use case. Because as you mentioned, if your assets are in one location, they travel to another location, and you need data to be collected throughout the entire process, you have to have a connectivity that works indoors, that works outdoors, that works in potentially rural areas and highly populated areas, and maybe working while it's on the water. It just needs to be able to. You need to have kind of solid connectivity in those cases. But there are some that are use cases in IoT that are very just kind of specific to a certain area, and they just need to be able to track, let's say, assets within a hospital or cars on an auto lot, for instance. And just the fact that there are so many different connectivity choices, it leaves the potential for IoT success to just generally increase across the board, because that component can be so specifically matched to the use case to not just fit the use case, but also fit the ROI on the cost and revenue side as well. So I think it's something important to kind of change the narrative a little bit and think of it more of as a good thing than as something that needs to necessarily scares people who are kind of embarking down this journey when they start thinking about all the different connectivity options out there.
Yep, absolutely. And you're right. Some assets may not traveling the globe, but all enterprises would look for reliability, would look for built-in security. Right, and again,
yes.
And if you look at these traits or characteristics, again, Cellular is doing so well on those aspects. And another key thing that Cellular technology can offer is power consumption minimization or optimization, meaning. Sure. Meaning, if you have a device out there, and you mentioned meters, for example, right? Meters are static devices. They are not traveling anywhere. And yet, once you deploy them, they stay out there for 10 and 12 and 15 years. So what kind of technology or connectivity technology can support such a long life cycle, right? And Cellular fits the bill very well because 100%. It has that energy saving modes. And, we talk about this Cellular IoT networks that we touched on at the beginning of our conversation, right? It only wakes up the devices when it needs to transfer and send data. Otherwise, just leaves the meters there. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Now, before we wrap up here, I have a couple just kind of final questions. I know you all did a report in the past. I believe it was last year or maybe within the last 12 to 18 months or so. I wanted to ask about, without going into too crazy detail about that report, I just wanted to kind of get a sense of how things have changed in terms of kind of digitalization challenges and goals organizations have had over, between when that report came out and this report, because there's a lot that has happened in our world in the last 12 months alone, but even without the pandemic, a lot has changed as far as from a technology standpoint. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, what has changed as far as challenges and goals that you've seen organizations have from when that report came out to when this report has been, is out now?
Yeah, absolutely. So that previous report called Connected Industries, we released that about half a year ago. That previous report looks at business and technology considerations for digital transformation. So it's the same topic, but looking at different angles, right? We learned that from that report that regardless of the business that they are in, all enterprises are pretty much in the same boat, and that is they embarked on digital transformation because they are looking for ways to be more efficient, to be compliant with regulations. Now that this is also a key important driver there. In we talk about smart meters, you talk about automotive industries, or even industrial. There are regulations in terms of safety and energy efficiency that are being applied. So IoT is helping them with that. They are looking for ways to stay ahead of competition, right, and to exceed customer expectations. That report we also look at concerns, and what concerns them the most are how to take advantage of data. So in this report we addressed that angle more vividly.
Gotcha.
How to stay ahead of cybersecurity threats, and how to ensure technology longevity. And again, we talk about smart meters as one example. Another long life cycle assets would be cars, right? Connected cars.
Sure.
Now, all those cars, they stay out there for 8 to 10 years. So businesses are thinking about, hey, if we deploy IoT projects today, how do we make sure that the technology choice that we have chosen today won't get obsolete in the next 18 months? Now, that's a big challenge for them. So I would say that the goals in terms of business driven outcomes and challenges are still pretty much valid today, even though, as you mentioned, technologies and new use cases are popping up all the time, especially the 5G and edge computing. But main fundamentals are still pretty valid today.
Okay, great. And the last question I have before we kind of wrap up is, when I went through the report, it kind of finishes up by saying that true digital transformation must be human-centric. Can you just tell our audience kind of what that means and what, if any, additional predictions that you have for 2021 and beyond with regards to digital transformation and what you expect to see?
Yeah, so that's a very good quote, right? Must be human-centric. Let me explain that by quoting one of our guests again, Phil McDermott, Chief Commercial Officer of our mobile operator partner, Arcesa. Phil said that at the heart of technology, there are always humans. And if we keep that in mind as a focus of everything that we do, exciting things will happen. And again, I think that's a pretty profound quote. So even though, today we have been talking about IoT and technology, it's really about us as people, right? Us as consumers, us as customers, and us as workers. And in terms of predictions, Gartner research shows that COVID has really accelerated IoT investment, not the other way around, because lockdowns and travel restrictions have meant that businesses have been forced to do things remotely and find new ways to interact with customers. In fact, I think all of us and the audience would have heard that COVID in general has accelerated digital transformation overall in the past 12 months, right? Companies are doing things that they would not have done without COVID. So not just IoT that it is accelerating. Our hope is that the world will go back to normal soon. But our prediction is this, that even in the post-COVID world, advancement in technology and in IoT is here to stay. Right? They won't be going backwards at all. And this year, 5G will become even more ubiquitous than 6 months ago. And with the rise of edge computing, artificial intelligence, I think we'll see new IoT use cases popping up even more going forward.
Fantastic. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you shedding more light and kind of insights into this report. Something that I really implore everyone out there listening to go read. The last thing I wanted to ask, kind of as a wrap up here, is talking a little bit more back to around Ericsson's offerings to the market. I know there are kind of two things that I would like to just quickly have you walk us through. One is the IoT Accelerator, basically Ericsson's IoT platform that manages connected products, and then the dedicated networks, private cellular networks, providing that dedicated connectivity for different sites. I know you kind of talked about them very briefly at the beginning, but I would love it if you could just kind of elaborate just a little bit more on both of them before we finish up.
Yes, that's right. So the first offering that we have is IoT Accelerator. This is our flagship IoT product, right? That allows enterprises to manage their connected products anywhere in the world. So giving total control and visibility of those devices so that they can understand the status, the performance of their products, and importantly, how their products are being used by their consumers, by their customers. And, we have gone through quite a few examples: the connected coffee machines, the pump, trace and tracks in logistics, etc. There, all managed by our IT platform. And the second one, private networks or dedicated networks. These are private cellular networks for connecting sites or venues. So network capacity is not shared with anyone else, meaning super high reliability, scalability, and security, all for your own use. And again, we are seeing the rise of private networks in ports and mines and manufacturing sites as they connect more self-driving vehicles and robots on their sites.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's great. I appreciate you kind of sharing that with our audience so they can get a better understanding of how, as they're listening, may be interested in exploring working with Ericsson and kind of what major offerings you have out there are, among other things, obviously. And now, last question I have is, people that are listening, what's the best way to find the report? Obviously, we'll link it up in all of our material, but just, is there a clear, easy website for them to go find it? How do you suggest they go about doing that?
Right. Just go to Ericsson.com and search Connected Enterprises Report. You'll find this latest report and other assets that we have on that site as well. So enjoy the report.
Yeah, it was great. I really recommend everybody reading it. I'm not just saying that because you're on here, but I do really do think it was great. I think the industry will appreciate the fact that you guys took the time and energy to do this and talk to a wide variety of companies and individuals who have insights that will help companies of all sizes, whether they're in the IoT space or looking to adopt IoT and get into that digital transformation journey themselves. So, Warren, I really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic, and thanks for being here.
You're very welcome, Ren.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this week on the IoT For All podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a rating or review and be sure to subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Also, if you have a guest you'd like to see on the show, please drop us a note at ryan@iotforall.com and we'll do everything we can to get them as a featured guest. Other than that, thanks again for listening and we'll see you next time.